In February 1947, designer Christian Dior unveiled his debut collection, Rose and Nuit. This collection was a direct response to the hardships endured during the World War II, showcasing extravagant use of fabric, padded bustles and hips, cinched waists and longer skirts, and especially fabric, and more fabric. Carmel Snow dubbed it the new look. Well, it was a new, but journalists. It was a revival of a silhouette that was very popular in the 19th century. Guys, welcome back to the next episode of Study of Shape. And as you guys have voted in the last episode, we are going to be covering this gown designed by Christian Dior in 1947 and named Rose France. Yes, Dior named his gowns. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Henny and this is Studio Henny's. So, let's have a quick look at this gown. So there were two main shapes in this 1947 collection. Rose, a tight-fitting bodice, narrow waist and full skirt. The silhouette was described as looking like an inverted carnation. And Nuit, or otherwise figure 8, a slender molded waist that connected curving feminine hips and bosoms. But wait a second. This gown was actually not part of the first spring collection, but the second one, the autumn-winter collection. However, this second collection still followed the style lines of this first collection. So I would categorize our gown into the figure 8. So this gown is a one-piece strapless evening dress in silk. The dress is draped over a boned cotton twill corset. The bodice is cut in 6-shaped panels. I found the bottom of the hem a little bit weird with this one tuck, but it turns out that it actually had the purpose of weight the gown. It has a heavy drape back panel with padded roll to accentuate the buttocks, described as the Derierre de Paris. Was it good? Okay, yeah, my French is horrible. You know that. Also, a couple of interesting facts about this gown. It's named Rose France, but according to the original charts, it was actually named Sadi. And then there must have been a mix-up. Yeah, things happen, right? Also, this design was not as it is currently. It was actually a completely strapless gown with this twisting drape on the front, and probably it was altered later to make it less risky because, guys, I don't think I have to say this. Showing one shoulder, it's fine. Showing two shoulders, it's just too much.
Sure, I'm decent.
Okay guys, so as per usual for the Study of Shape series, I'm gonna be working with calico because in this series we are mainly focusing on the shape of the garment, so I'm essentially just making toiles. So inexpensive fabrics and just no proper finishings, you know what I'm saying. But for this occasion, I actually had to buy a little bit of like a satin that I can do the drapey parts with. I didn't buy, this is not like an expensive silk, obviously, but I needed something that drapes better than the calico. I have to say that the fabric I bought is probably thinner, lighter than what it would have been for the gown, at least what I can tell from the pictures. I never seen this gown in person. But I bought a lighter fabric because, as per usual, I'm going to work on my half-scale dummy, and I thought it would be more suitable. Okay guys, let's make a gown. Oh, and make sure to stick around till the end because I'm gonna need you to vote for the next gown that I want to make, so I'll see you there. So I just started off with a piece of calico, just aligning it along the center front, along my grain line, and just smoothing the fabric to the side and securing it with a few pins. And then I moved on to the back and did exactly the same thing. I mean, guys, you have seen me do this a few times. So as I was draping, I was just making sure that I leave a little bit of excess there at the back to create the darts, and then I just cut some excess fabric away so it's easier to handle. And then I was ready to create the darts at the back as well. Once I had that, I just snipped into the fabric on the side, so I just released a little bit of tension so it can sit smoother on the body. And once it was done, I started mapping out the neckline and also marking the darts that I just created. And also marking the side seams on the front and at the back as well. At this moment, this does not have to be perfect. We can always adjust it a little bit later as we are creating the pattern. Also just marking the back and the center front lines and also drawing the hem. And that's it. Oh no, actually wait, I forgot a bunch of things. I needed to mark the waistline. And I didn't like the way the hem was, so I needed to change that. And then I thought I was finished, but then I realized that I forgot to write the annotations. So I need to do center back, side seam, center front, and now we are finished. Right, so right after this, I just took all the pieces and secured them on my table and covered it with a paper so I can trace it. At this point, the lines on the calico are not perfect. You're going to have to smooth the lines as you go and also making sure that you transfer all the information, such as the grain line and all your reference lines and notches, annotations, anything that might be important. And then I started walking my pattern pieces, and I always use my waistline as a reference point, as a starting point, and walk my pattern pieces along the seam. And you can see that my neckline was not aligned, so I needed to fix that. And I did the same at the back, and making sure that my seams are matching and just correct any mistakes. And then I was ready to add the seam allowance so we can stitch a quick mock-up. So I just moved on to cutting the pieces out of some calico so I can stitch that mock-up. Right, so we were ready to stitch a quick mock-up for me to see if there are any fitting issues. So there were some minor fitting issues, like my back seemed to be a little bit too small and I wanted to adjust that front seam on the bustier, but apart from that it looked quite okay. So once the alterations were done, I was ready to stitch another toile, but only a half toile, because we need to get these style lines in order. Because if you notice, the waistline actually is curved, so it's higher on the front and then is dipping towards the back. So I just started marking these lines onto my half bustier. So later I can also drape the skirt. And then I grabbed another piece of calico and secured it at the center front along the grain line, just like we did with the top, and started draping the skirt. Secured it a little bit at the side seam, leaving some excess for the dart, and also making sure that my grain line is parallel. And I cut a little bit of excess away so it's easier to handle. And then I started creating my darts at the front, making sure that it aligns with the seams of the bustier. And just securing it with a few pins. And then I moved on to the back, aligning my center back along the grain line. And again, just keeping my grain line parallel, securing the fabric at the side and just cutting some excess fabric away so it's easier to handle, but not too close to the side seam because we're gonna need that excess fabric. I'm not going to overlap the fabric at the sides, but instead I'm gonna keep them facing each other. This way I just find it easier to create the side seam on a skirt because I need to make sure that everything is kept in balance, and it's just easier for me to see and handle. And I have plenty of access to play around if I need to shift the side seam to the back or to the front, whatever is needed. Once I had the skirt roughly draped, I was ready to transfer the style lines that were showing through the fabric from the bustier. And after that, I just cut more excess away. And I was actually ready with the skirt to be transferred onto pattern. So just grabbed all the pieces and started tracing all the lines and all the grain lines and everything that is important, just like we did with the top before. And also I was ready to create the patterns for the outer bustier. That would be like the fashion fabric that has this seam, because the inner corset is gonna go in one piece to the upper hip, but the outer shell needed these style lines, these seam lines to attach the skirt to. So essentially I just laid my patterns over the calico pieces and I just transferred the lines that I'm drawn. I'm gonna have to create a separate set of pattern for the outer shell, so I'm just going to trace all the pieces. When I had the new patterns, I needed to make sure that all my seams are matching, and I needed to shift the darts a little bit so they would match the bustier properly. And here's a little tip for you guys how to get a nice dart draping. So you just fold the dart in the direction that you want to sew it, secure it together, and you just gonna cut on the outer edge of the paper. And once you're done, you're gonna have a perfectly shaped dart. So in the beginning of the video, we discussed that the dress would have a solid cotton twill corset on the inside. Well, I don't have any cotton twill right now, so I'm just gonna help the calico with some horsehair canvas, so we would still have a nice strong corset on the inside. I just cut the pieces together, so the calico with the horsehair, and then I'm just going to stitch them together before I assemble the corset itself. So I'm just going to create a stitch on the edge of the fabric to secure them together. And while I'm stitching here, maybe it's a good time to select the next gown that we are going to study in the next episode. So, option number 1 is this beautiful gown from Yves Saint Laurent from 1983. I love this big bow, don't you? Option number 2 is this dress from 1961, designed by Balenciaga. An interesting silhouette. And option number 3 is this gown designed by Lanvin in 1939. So guys, as usual, just leave your votes in the comments and let me know which gown you would like to see next. Right, so I have my corset assembled, well, the bustier is assembled, and now I'm going to attach some boning. And I'm just going to stitch the boning straight onto the seam of the bustier. Normally, you know, this would be nicely channeled, but because we are just making a toile, I'm just gonna stitch it straight onto the seams. So once I had the corset ready, I just laid over the outer shell. You know, that would be the fashion fabric. I also laid the skirt over. I just wanted to see how the stylines look and if everything is fine. And then finally we can start draping. So at this point, I just grabbed the whole piece of fabric and just started to play around and see what length I would need. So at this point, nothing is cut. I'm just playing around with the fabric. Once I had a better idea, I cut off some length, and then I needed to drape this on the bias. So I just folded the fabric in a 45-degree angle and just cut that little piece off. And then I had a bias cut fabric piece to play with. And I'm not going to create a pattern for this drape, so I'm just gonna drape everything on the dummy and then I'm going to stitch it straight away. So when you have something like this and you have a curved seam, don't start like tilting the fabric. Just keep everything parallel to the center front, to the grain line, and start pinning around, and then later you can cut the shape around, as you can see how I did. And now I'm just snipping into the fabric so I can create that curved shape. And then I started slowly ruching the fabric, pleating the fabric to try to get that hip draping on the dress. And it's very organic. I'm just pushing the fabric up as I go. And at this point, nothing is perfect. I just want to have an idea of how much fabric I need. So I just started pleating and gathering the fabric with my hand and just securing it with a few pins here and there. And once I thought I knew how much fabric I need, I just cut the pieces away. And again, this is still not perfect. It's a slow process of seeing how it should be. So just slowly folding things and pleating things and just slowly cutting excess fabric away. You should always make sure that you have enough fabric to play around, but not too much so it's hard to handle. And once I had the drape done, I just took it off the dummy and I stitched it, like secured it along that seam line. And once I had that, I just cut the excess away along the shape. And I did the same thing at the back. And then I carried on with the back sash, and just like before, because this is going to sit on a curved seam, I'm just keeping everything straight and parallel at this point, and just trying to create some organic pleats. So all the pleats are going to be different, some smaller, some bigger, some overlapping, so that it can just organically flow at the back. And once I was happy, I just secured it along the seam again. Guys, I have a confession to make. I made a mistake here at the back because the shaping of the back is not exactly correct. On the original dress, the back of the shaping is actually quite angular. It has like a little bit of like a square shaping, but what I did is that I actually curved all the way. Well, there is a little feedback for myself. Right, so once I had the back ready, I draped both sides at this point. I moved on to the top, And I started off draping on the bias as well. And again, with plenty of fabric to start with. So I can roughly map out how this drape is gonna look, and I can slowly cut some fabric away. But for now, we are just trying to get an idea of how this is going to look. So I started pleating. I worked on this simultaneously. So at the front, a little bit at the back, a little bit on the side. And once I was happy, I just started cutting some fabric away, so I have less fabric to work with, and it's a bit easier to handle. And once I was roughly happy, I just hand stitched everything quickly and just secured it to the bustier, because I thought it's a good next step to actually assemble everything, because at this point everything is just a separate piece. So I wanted to secure my neckline, so attach my outer shell to the corset, and also attach the skirt to the upper bodice. So just quickly hand stitching the pieces. And once I had everything assembled, I started to redrape that area. And well, I had like several attempts to drape this until I was actually happy with it. So some of it I did off camera, but the process is the same. It's such an organic drape, and you really need to work in a 360-degree on this, as I mentioned before. And so I was always just pinning it here, pinning it there, until I got to the desired shape. I even had to, cut a little bit more fabric away. The finishing on this would be pin hem, but then the edges would be folded in. And when I was happy, I just started securing everything by hand. So next we needed to create some bum roll. And so I grabbed a piece of wadding and I started to shape it into the shape of that back seam. And I actually used 4 layers of wadding is cut into that shape. And I tried to thin the layers towards where it would be meeting that seam. So I just secured it with a few hand stitches so it makes it a bit thinner. And then I covered it with some extra satin I had. So we are essentially making little pillows. And then once it was done and covered, I just hand stitched it close to the seam under the back sash. And voila, Derierre de Paris.